I'm Emile Lin. I'm in grade 12. This is me. So I have many hobbies. These are just a few of them. Anthropology, language, politics, history, ontology. You might think, these are some pretty kind of varied hobbies, right? Like how do these, relate? But there is one way in which all these hobbies can intersect. They can all never mind. I'm a world builder. I like world building. So they can all come together in this way. This is my driving question. How does the art of world building, semantics, and the creation of unique languages contribute to our understanding of culture? I'm Emile Lin. I'm in grade 12. So Webster's dictionary defines, so this is the Jim Belushi of definitions. Webster's dictionary defines world building as the art of creating a fictional world. So can't be, more complicated than that. So this is some background. From 2013, so from when I was 7 years old, from year 3 until the present, I have been creating this is my first world building project. It was this sort of world called Walden, which I continued up until present day, and it sort of started as this project that my friend and I had created, and it just sort of continued to expand. And throughout the years, I started to introduce more things, and as I learned more things, I incorporated them into this world. So here's a sort of map of it. These are sort of in order what I've had in this sort of world. And most recently, languages, which is sort of like just world building, so not really part of this, whatever. No relation to Walden by Henry David Thoreau, although, somehow allegorically we did sort of fill some of these kinds of themes throughout the world building. So these are just some flags. So these are sort of the early years where I sort of it's almost like an exaggeration of the sort of governments and societies and cultures. And so I had a brief pause where I sort of tried to do this sort of like topography of this sort of like prehistoric world, this sort of like alternate version of Earth. I called it Terran, obviously, and then here are the continents, and I tried climates, which I've never done before, and like topography, whatever. So the post-later years, this sort of like Qing dynasty, like Three Kingdoms, Yellow Turban Rebellion, whatever. I sort of tried to emanate the kind of, and exaggerate the kind of designs that these flags use, and all the sort of text, the sort of heavy text. And then in the neo-post late years, a sort of nostalgic return to this kind of socialist theme, because I wanted to try that again. So constitutions, which are important. Unfortunately, despite my real-life political affiliation, a lot of these governments and societies ended up falling into this sort of like traditional Rechtsstaat constitution, which a lot of modern day sort of Western countries use. And we sort of, throughout this was sort of like this project with me and my friends, one dozen of my friends, whatever. And we sort of like engaged in this sort of like storytelling through artifacts, these sort of like elements of lore. There are like a million more photos, but whatever. Overview over. So that's the background. My 3 goals: to take my learned experience in world building and to build upon that foundation with more detail than before, to start an entirely new world building project. Goal 2, to create a conlang that is a part of my new world. So conlang is a constructed language, so a language that I create, and so I want to explore this because it's something that I've never done before. And goal 3, to create an engaging presentation where I present all this. So my hobbies again. However, I'm also interested in sci-fi fantasy, Star Wars, Star Trek, Blade, Dune, whatever, because I'm a nerd. And so my new project, completely different thematically, it's this sort of galactic scene. So here's the coalition, which is this sort of like oppressive force that started with good ideals, sort of taking over the galaxy or whatever. Here's a sort of galactic map, which I'll talk about the sort of aesthetic design of that later on. You know, just sort of drawing inspiration from real life examples. I mean, not even intentionally most of the time. Sort of, it just ends up filling these kinds of roles that, you know, these sort of situations and contexts that we've had in history. The law enforcement and the coalition standard, which I sort of like drew heavy inspiration from how the Romans did it. And I thought what would be interesting is if, you know, the sort of like, that's the sort of coalition emblem, the logo. And I thought it could be kind of interesting if the sort of police force had an element of that, but it also has a sort of deeper meaning. It sort of resembles the Greek symbol phi, which in philosophy means, you know, meaning, truth, realization, but it's missing the sort of little nub at the top, so it's kind of like a morphing, sort of twisted version of reality, so the truth is sort of suppressed. And then the coalition militarily, I don't know anything about like military stuff or whatever, but I just sort of like drew inspiration from the United States military structure. I don't really know about it. I thought it was kind of cool. Heavily standardized. And then the technological advancements of the coalition, this sort of very technologically advanced sort of like consolidating power where all of these planets and resources are all being brought into one place, which is sort of the goal of these empires. And then RGEP, which is the Rapid Galactic Expansion Project. And here is the sort of galactic map, which I thought was kind of interesting in sort of like every single piece of like sci-fi media that has space or whatever and other planets represents the galaxy in this sort of map in different ways. And I thought it was kind of interesting. I actually drew inspiration from floral arrangements. These sort of Taiwanese floral arrangements that are so particular, and they have these little diagrams, and you'll see those later. And it's sort of this colonial project to harmonize the galaxy, whatever, you know, like classic evil stuff. So travel and conquest, these sort of like many types of ships. I've never sort of drawn like spaceships or vehicles before. I'm not really good at it, so this was sort of like a first try. Some lore building. Kisklovians, which is this humanoid race that I created that I really love. They've adapted to the environment that they evolved in. They've got this sort of civilizational mindset, which a lot of current day world leaders have, you know, with populists especially. And they had this former glory, but ended up falling from the sort of like, you know, first place or whatever, due to interplanetary squabbles. Some more Kisklovian stuff, and then Kisklovian belt androids, which are the sort of like these sort of androids that they created. They use their own specialized language to communicate. They're employed mostly as filler labor in industrial sectors because they're not really good at anything else, and they're sort of comprised of treads and belts in their internal machinery, which is why they're called that. And so I tried to sort of draw inspiration from these kinds of early 20th century designs for what an android might look like, you know, these sort of like interesting, almost human-like design, but it's obviously not. And so Kisklovian android speak. So this is sort of the main part of the presentation. So there are many different types of conlang. There are conlang constructed language. There are auxiliary languages, which are meant to be languages meant to sort of fill spaces between languages, meant to create sort of an understanding between languages. There are loglangs, which are logic languages, which are sort of meant to be perfect. There are eng languages, which are engineered languages. These are sort of these also include hypothetical languages, philosophical languages. A lot of languages that we have today are also engineered languages, like Mandarin or Cantonese, and even just written Chinese, traditional or simplified, is all engineered. And then nat-langs, which you might think is natural languages, but in the context of conlangs, it is actually naturalistic languages, which are meant to emanate real languages. Then there are art-langs, which are, I mean, obvious for aesthetic pleasure, meant to fill a fictional setting. And these can mix as well, so some of them. So, so my language is an art-lang. Obviously, it's to fill a fictional setting. It's also an engineered language. It's sort of like it's sort of hypothetical, and it's definitely not meant to be perfect. So what is Kisklovian Android speak? So it's a slightly tonal language in certain contexts. So in English, it isn't really tonal language. You can say hello, and you can say hello, and it's the same meaning. But of course, in Chinese, things mean different things depending on the tone in which you say them. Then there's incredibly high-level phonology. So phonology is essentially the grammar of sounds and is inherently tied to language. So it's essentially how a language treats certain sounds. And the main unit of phonology is a phoneme, which is sort of like, I like to think of it as like a werewolf. It sort of changes depending on the context that it's in. So certain sounds, like, for example, in French, for example, you would say, if you were to say the children, right, you would, it would be, if you were trying to say, sorry, so without any phonemes, it would be le enfant, but that doesn't really roll off the tongue, and so le becomes a phoneme, which then it removes the vowel and it becomes an apostrophe, so it's l'enfant. So in front of a vowel, the phoneme is that the vowel that comes before that becomes an apostrophe. So ingressive creaky voice exclusively. So all of the languages that we speak in our world are egressive, which means we breathe out when we speak them. And so ingressive is when you breathe in. So it would sound a little bit like this. And then creaky voice is sort of like, it's perfectly normal. A lot of people speak with creaky voice. It's sort of like adding this kind of creak on your voice, kind of resting on your vocal cords. And so together, it sounds a little bit like this. And so there are lots of qualifiers and very few null qualifiers. So qualifiers essentially are words that modify things. So if I say the dog was sad, there are no qualifiers in that, but the dog was somewhat sad. Somewhat is a qualifier which changes how sad the dog is. And then null qualifiers, which are actually very different. And these are essentially when a language can remove a certain word and the context will still be there. So for example, in English, you would say Maria does not want to eat, and then you would say she does not want to eat, right? But then in Italian, elle means she, but you can remove it. So it would be Maria non vuole mangiare, but then she does not want to eat would be non vuole mangiare. No, elle non vuole mangiare. So elle in that context is a null qualifier. Dreadful amounts of morpheming. Obviously, I'm not going to show all of this. And morphemes are essentially just literally like sounds put together to have a meaning. So for example, in pigs, pig is a morpheme, meaning pig, and then the S, the S, indicates plural. So, in unbreakable, meaning not able to, or sort of like negating the meaning of the rest of the word, and then break, to break, and then able, to be able to. So unbreakable. Very, very complicated phonemes, as I said. So there are lots of different, And morphemes can also include suffixes, like all of that. And so it's reliant on pulmonary sound. So you might think that pulmonary sound means lungs, air coming out of the lungs, but it can also mean air coming into the lungs. So sounds that are sort of voiceless. So for example, t and p, those can't be heard in the language unless they're voiced. So if I were to say t, t, you can't hear that. But if I say t, t, that is voiced, and so you can hear that. And it's got a very simple syllable structure. So I want to talk about syllable structure. So syllable structure, I like to think of it as sort of the potential for syllables in a language. It consists of three parts. the onset, which is the part before the vowel, which is the middle of the syllable, which is always required, sorry, the nucleus, which is the vowel, which is incredibly important and required for it to be a syllable, and then the coda, which is the tail of the syllable. So the onset and the coda are both optional in pretty much every single language. So for English, the maximum sort of potential for syllable structure for syllables are 3 consonants, and you can see they're in parentheses because they're optional, 1 vowel, which is not in parentheses because it's required, and then 4 consonants. So it's actually quite a lot. And one word that fulfills an entire English syllable is the word strengths, because you've got the vowel in the middle, and then you've got so many consonants, packed on either end. And then in Japanese, it's 1 consonant, optional consonant, a vowel, and then literally N, like an optional letter N. Or not letter, but the sound. And Kislovian Android speak is similar to English, except it has a very simple syllable structure where syllables cannot be longer than just 1 consonant on either end. So it's a monosyllabic language, which means that every single word is 1 syllable. Ingressive creaky voice. So these are the modifiers in IPA, which is International Phonetic Alphabet. That's how we catalog sounds and categorize them in language. So ch in church would become ch. In wool would become u. So an important phoneme for the language. Let's turn all vowels into phoneme. I'm just going to present one because the language is way more complicated, and this is all just as a requirement for what this is all leading up to. So let's turn all vowels into a phoneme. So all vowels, of course, then the environment being after another vowel, as long as there's no punctuation. And in this language, punctuation, when written down, is apostrophes, and so dashes are not punctuation. So after another vowel, the modification would be that it gains a glottal stop. So a glottal stop you can't actually voice on its own. So if you all try saying uh-oh or button, you can hear that your epiglottis is literally closing off the sound halfway through, and so that's the glottal stop. So the language is punctuated, and this is a requirement for the rule to function. So these are the consonants. They're the exact same as the ones in the English language, except for 2 which are just the voice ones, because they can't be heard, obviously. And with the exception of the inclusion of the retroflex. So retroflex in Latin means bent back. So if you all bend your tongues back and try making the t sound, that's the retroflex. Yeah, and then so all these sounds are pulmonic, which means they require your lungs, and then non-pulmonic sounds, there's only one, which is a click, so, and then there's a co-articulated wh. So these are the vowels. I'm not going to read all of these. So a few morphemes. So these are suffixes. Meaning is a suffix primarily indicating planetary status, and it can also act as an intensifier. So, and then also all nouns require a tense, so or an indication of lack thereof. So, meaning no tense, meaning this primary here or interior. So, means this planet. Then there's which is a suffix indicating secondary substatus, and it can also mean weaker. So, which is this planet's moon or satellite. Then there's which with an optional n, and so which is the attack too weak, although it doesn't specify location, and there are no null qualifiers, so therefore it has no meaning. Also, how do I go back? Okay. Also, it's a suffix, it indicates more than necessary, and it can also mean violence and attack. So you can see sort of in this period of harmony that the Kislovians had when they created the belt androids, that obviously their minds were focused on peace. And so, more than necessary also means attack or violence. So, it clearly wasn't in their priorities. Morphemes. So prefixes. So these are all different tense prefixes. So meaning future tense, meaning a prefix indicating the relationship between a part and a whole, or of, and it requires a noun before it. Then there's th, which is a prefix denoting no tense, and every noun requires an indicator tense, whatever. The, which is a prefix denoting past tense, and then ta, which is a prefix negating the meaning of the word it affixes to, similar to un or an in English, and it can also indicate hypothetical. So all living nouns require a state of being, unbeing, and being. So if I were to say, ka, meaning un, and then which is being, and then kits, which is a transliteration of our word cat. So it would be ta, which is imaginary cat. A few new rules. So suffixes can be stacked and act like modifiers and qualifiers. So yeah, they can stack. There are no pronouns in this language, so there's no I, you, they, it, or me. Vowels cannot touch one another unless in diphthongs. So diphthongs are essentially sounds that are, so for example, the co-articulated hu is very similar to a diphthong. It's essentially two vowels that are put together to make one sort of like curvy sound. I like to think of it that way. And glottal stops are required to punctuate them, though exceptions apply, so this is a very complicated language. All living nouns require a state of unbeing, being, whatever. Pitch modifiers. So this is sort of what I meant by tonal. Obviously, there are other instances, but essentially these affect the entire word and words end between hyphens. High pitch is denoted by less points to shape, and low deep pitch is denoted by more points to shape. I'm probably only going to use the highest pitch and the lowest pitch because it's very, very difficult to sort of differentiate if you start going into the shades. So it's and and I likely won't use this more than once for time of whatever. So numbers. Numbers are represented by sound or length of speech sounds. They cannot express infinity. They're similar to mine numerals, so they're base 10. It utilizes Moraic counting, which is a term I've coined, which essentially means, so a mora is a speech sound that is less than or equal to a syllable. So if I were to say ba, that's one mora, and so that's monomoraic. And if I were to say ba, that's bimoraic, so that's two moras. So there's no standard for counting. So one, a monomoraic sound would be two, a bimoraic sound would be and then trimoraic sound So it utilizes clicks as bases. So essentially means 20. To multiply, it is b, and to add, it is d. So if I were to say, I don't know, 6, I would say da. But more, yeah. So belt androids are not used for arithmetic, obviously. So a few nouns are and adjectives. So goof, which we already learned, and then gu, which is wrought, created, or birth, which is carbon or life, which is attention, notice, alert, focus, look, or see, which is being or entity, which is a transliteration of cat, and then which is designation. So droids, designation for droids, and then name for non-droids. So compounding suffixes, so there's un, which is destruction, destroyed, or overloaded, Gusan, which is this planet, and Gusan, which is over there. So let's apply our knowledge. So guessing game. So let me just first read this. So this is the direct translation of what this is. This is a famous movie phrase, and I want you guys to try to guess what this is. So current tense, attention. No tense, being entity carbon there. No tense, being entity this here. Primary designation 913 of from. Past tense, unbeing creator. Past destroyed. Future tense, being entity carbon primary. Current tense, alert of relation. Future destroyed, and then a sexamoraic yell for flare. Any, yeah? I have a hint, actually. So this is the hint. Does anyone know what it is? You killed my father. Yes, it is. It is, hello, my name is Inigo Montoya, you killed my father, prepare to die. So here is the nightmare of a phrase that I've translated. So future substatus, that can mean present because there's no actual word for, there's no actual singular prefix for present tense. So you have to either create that with past tense and future tense, and then using modifiers. So, which is future substatus, and then which is attention, and then there is no tense, so being entity carbon, more sort of specificity, and then which is being entity this here, and then sorry, I did that wrong. So that's designation. Then 9, which is I alphabetically, and then 13, which is M alphabetically, or the alternative is that I transliterate it so it becomes so that's Inigo Montoya, and then there's of, from, and then past, so and then which is unbeing, which is creator, and then this primary, and then which is destroyed, and then there's being entity carbon here, then past intensifier, which can also mean present, and then alert, and then destroyed, and then then relation future, destroyed, and then sexumer yell for flare. So if anyone wants to join me when I say this, I don't think I drank enough water. I will commence.
Inigo Montoya
That is. Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. Prepare to die. I'm Emile. I'm in grade 12. Perhaps the language could slowly change and adapt over time, and the suffixes and prefixes could become even similar to the regular morphemes we have in English, even become more natural and even aggressive as living creatures begin to adapt the language with the use of pigeons, creoles, etc.
Human,
which is human. Doodle workshop, a few doodles I did to do with the lore building, and then my conclusion slides. So, goal outcomes. Goal number 1. I've created a new universe with technology and social cultural elements, both inspired and left unexplored by my previous world-building projects. Humanity's hubris exists in many forms. Goal 2, my conlang has all the most important components of a language, as well as some additional parts which make it uniquely Android and uniquely stupid. Goal number 3, you tell me this presentation represents the completion of my 3rd goal. Reflection. I learned how to create a conlang, which was more difficult than I expected. I would change, I would spend more time on my drawings. I feel like I didn't. I did all of them pretty much in one day. That was actually after the largest earthquake in Taiwan in 20 years. And then I created this. I will in the future continue developing my world building skills, blah, blah, blah. And then here are my, so I couldn't find anyone to interview for my project. And developing a conlang takes a bit of time. So inspiration for the galactic maps. So these are the sort of Taiwanese flower arrangements, and you can see like heavy inspiration in these sort of like very intricate diagrams. Thank you. Any, yes?
Are you going to be releasing anything for your conlang, like a dictionary or like a YouTube video on how to do it and pronounce it and stuff?
You know what?
That's so cool.
That's actually, thank you. That's actually a very good idea. Originally my ISM was to create a conlang and then incorporate it into a comic, but I just didn't feel any passion for that, and it made me not want to do it at all, so instead I just did whatever, and then I made this. Any other questions? Yes, Gino?
Will you ever teach me?
Yeah, sure. Anything else? Yeah?
How many hours did you put into this?
I don't know. I feel like time sort of started to collapse and sort of like meld together. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months. I'm not really sure how much time I spent on this. I know it was a lot. Yeah?
How much did you have to research actual language structure and the building of a language and also use your imagination? Like what was the ratio, the balance?
Well, like despite my existing linguistic knowledge, I don't think it was actually enough to create a conlang. Like this has a lot of holes in it. The thing with the no location specified, I didn't really follow up on that, so sorry about that. But yeah, there was a bit of research involved. It helped that I can speak, so many languages, but obviously there were 3, or like kind of almost 4. Anyways, yeah, so that's it. Cool. Yes. Oh, yeah, sorry.
So this is a very fantastic presentation. I really like it. But my question is, how long have you been learning this, like the language?
This language?
Yes.
Well, I created this language. So the amount of time that I've been, creating it was like still, yeah, as I said before, I still have no idea. It was like, yeah, maybe like a few months, I don't know. There's more to it, but this is just, yeah, sorry, all year. Yes, all year. I've been working on this all year, as I should have been, Any other questions? Yeah?
So did you draw any inspiration from like science fiction or any like other places for like language?
Oh, for the language.
Yeah.
Yeah, I expect that all the questions are going to be about that. Not, well, I mean, the thing is, I sort of, in my head, I have this idea of like, this sort of like floating droid or whatever, and it sounds like, and that's basically how I came up with all of this. I just, that was the first initial sort of idea. Yeah.
Why do the androids have to have a different language to the humans?
I don't know, I thought it was cool. Well, I mean, like, maybe they need their own way of communicating. I think, let them have something, right, for once, Yeah.
Why the flower arrangements?
Well, I think it also sort of played into this idea. I'm not sure if I created the sort of world-building stuff before I went to that museum in Taiwan and saw, like, all these sort of beautiful flower arrangements, but like I don't know, there's something about like these, sorry, let's go back so we can look at them again, because I want to look at them. They're like, there's something about these that's so like, intricate and it's like meant to be so perfect, but it's sort of like through that I can kind of see these sort of like navigational lines and like sort of planning stages. I don't know, Oh, sorry.
I think you need 2 hours.
Yeah, I skimmed through a lot. I had to cut down so much. It was actually crazy. It was very stressful.
Job of keeping the audience engaged by making us.
Yeah, no, I think I sort of had to, and I also had the GIFs, so you could just watch those on loop if you got bored. But
There are so many questions for you, Emile. We are on
Sorry.
break officially right
Yeah.
now.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Thank you again. I mean, if you have questions, Emile, hi,